My sibling pretended to be pregnant to ruin me, and everyone fell for it. I was standing in my mother's living room, still wearing the blazer from my morning work presentation, when my younger sister Brooke looked me dead in the eyes and told our entire family that my fiancé had got her pregnant. The room went silent in a way I had never experienced before, not the comfortable silence after Thanksgiving dinner, not the soft pause before someone laughs at a joke. This was the kind of silence that cracks something open, the kind that splits a life into a before and an after. My name is Leah Harmon. I was 29 years old. I had spent the last 6 years building a career, a relationship, and a future that I genuinely believed in. In less than 4 minutes, my 24-year-old sister dismantled all of it. And the most devastating part wasn't that she said it. It was that every single person in that room believed her. To understand what happened, you have to understand what our family looked like from the outside versus what it actually was. From the outside, a warm, close-knit family in Columbus, Ohio. Our mother, Carol, was a retired school administrator who hosted Sunday dinners and knew all the neighbors by name. Our father, Dennis, passed away from a heart attack 3 years prior, which left our mother with a house, a modest savings account, and a grief she never quite recovered from. I was the oldest. Brooke was 5 years younger. And between us, in ways that had nothing to do with birth order, there had always been a quiet, simmering competition that neither of us fully acknowledged out loud. From the inside, it was complicated. Brooke had always been the charming one, effortlessly social, naturally pretty, the kind of person who could walk into a room and have 3 new friends by the time she left. I was the driven one, quieter, more serious, the one who got scholarships and internships and performance reviews that said things like exceeds expectations. Our parents loved us both, but they praised us differently. Mom celebrated Brooke's warmth. Dad had celebrated my ambition. When he died, I lost my loudest cheerleader, and Brooke lost the one parent who ever gently pushed back on her. I don't think she ever processed that. She started making small choices after Dad died that troubled me. She quit the graphic design program she'd been halfway through. She moved back home at 22, then 23, then 24, always with a reason, always with a plan that never quite materialized. She borrowed money from Mom more than once. She dated a rotation of men who never seemed to last more than a few months. And she had a habit, one I'd noticed since we were teenagers, of wanting what I had precisely because I had it. When I was 16, she begged my mother for the exact same running shoes I'd saved up for myself. When I was 23 and got promoted at my first real job, she applied to the same company 2 weeks later. When I got engaged to Daniel at 28, Brooke spent 3 weeks barely texting me back. Daniel Carter was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm. He was 31, steady, funny in a low-key way that I found genuinely refreshing. He wasn't flashy. He drove a used Ford F-150 and preferred grilling burgers in the backyard over going to restaurants, but he was reliable in all the ways that mattered. He had met my family 6 months into our relationship, and they adored him. My mother called him a good, solid man, which from Carol Harmon was about the highest praise she gave. Brooke had always been friendly with Daniel. Too friendly, maybe, in a way that I noticed but dismissed as her general social energy. She hugged him a beat too long. She laughed loudly at his jokes. She texted him occasionally, birthday stuff, forwarding memes, casual things, and when I mentioned once that it made me mildly uncomfortable, Daniel looked genuinely puzzled and said, "She's just being friendly, Lee, she's your sister." I let it go. I should not have let it go. It was a Sunday in early October. Mom had asked everyone to come over, not for any particular reason, just one of her standing dinners. Daniel and I drove over together. Brooke was already there when we arrived, which was unusual. She was normally the last one through the door. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and when I walked in, she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't quite anxiety. It was something almost rehearsed, like she'd been sitting there practicing her face. Mom had made pot roast. We sat down. Everything felt normal for approximately 15 minutes. Then Brooke set down her fork, folded her hands in her lap, and said, "I need to tell everyone something." My mother looked up with the expression of a woman, bracing for either a new boyfriend announcement or a request for money. "I'm pregnant," Brooke said. My mother's face immediately shifted into something soft and concerned. "Oh, honey. It's Daniel's." The words landed like something physical. I felt them hit my chest, my throat, the back of my eyes all at once. I looked at Daniel, who had gone completely still beside me, his fork suspended halfway between his plate and his mouth. "What?" I said. Brooke didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on our mother. "It happened a few months ago. I didn't know how to say anything. I've been trying to figure out what to do." "That's not true," Daniel said. His voice was flat and careful. "Brooke, that is not true." "I have texts," she said. She pulled out her phone and placed it face up on the table. Mom leaned in. I sat there with a ringing in my ears that I can only describe as the sound of your reality coming apart at the seams. Mom looked at the phone and her expression changed. I couldn't see what was on the screen from where I was sitting, but whatever she saw made her set the phone down and look at Daniel with something cold and unfamiliar in her eyes. "Those texts aren't what she's saying they are," Daniel said immediately, louder now. "We texted, yes, because she's Lee's sister. She sent me a link to a song once. I called her back because she said she needed to talk to someone about Lee's dad's estate stuff and she didn't want to stress Lee out. That's it." "You never told me that," I said. He turned to me. It didn't seem like something I needed to report. She asked me one question about the estate lawyer Mom used. I answered it. That was the whole conversation. Lee, Brooke's voice was soft now, almost sorrowful. I'm sorry, I know this is devastating, I didn't plan for this to happen. You're lying, I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. She took a test, Mom said quietly. Brooke, did you bring? Brooke reached into her bag and produced what was, undeniably, a positive pregnancy test in a small Ziploc bag, the kind of thing you'd save to show someone. The test had 2 clear lines. The room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically. It shifted the way a foundation cracks quietly with a kind of permanence. My Aunt Susan, who had come for dinner and was sitting at the far end of the table, pressed her hand to her mouth. My cousin Trevor, who was 19 and shouldn't have even been there, stared at the table. You need to leave, my mother said to Daniel. Carol, he started. Please leave my house. Daniel stood up. He looked at me and I saw something in his face that I recognized, the kind of look a person gets when they're genuinely panicking because they know they're telling the truth and no one believes them. Lee, I didn't do this. I swear to you I did not do this. I didn't say anything. I was trying to hold myself together in the middle of my mother's dining room, in front of my aunt and my teenage cousin, with a positive pregnancy test on the table and my sister crying into her sleeve. Daniel walked out. Mom turned to me with wet eyes. I'm so sorry, baby. She's lying, I said again. No one responded to that. They were all looking at Brooke. In that moment, I understood something I had never fully understood before. It doesn't matter how long you've been someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's fiancé. It doesn't matter how many years of trust you've built. The right accusation, delivered at the right moment, with the right prop, can undo all of it in under 4 minutes. The week that followed was the worst of my life. Daniel and I spoke that night on the phone for 2 hours. He was composed but clearly shaken, and he kept cycling through the same things. The texts were innocent. He had never been alone with Brooke in any context that could have led to what she was claiming, and he genuinely didn't understand what she was doing or why. He said he wanted to get a paternity test. I said that required an actual baby, and we were months away from knowing if that was even real. He asked me if I believed him. I told him I didn't know, and I hated myself for saying it. But here's the truth. I was 29 years old and I had just watched my mother ask my fiancé to leave her house because my sister produced a positive pregnancy test and a phone with his contact name on it. The rational part of my brain said Brooke was lying. The terrified part of my brain said, what if she isn't? I moved out of the apartment Daniel and I shared and into a friend's spare room, not because I'd decided anything, but because I needed to think, and I couldn't think with him in the next room. My friend Priya was gracious about it, but couldn't hide the look on her face when I explained what had happened. Do you believe her? Priya asked. No, I said. Then why did you leave? I didn't have a clean answer to that. The honest answer was, because doubt, even the thinnest thread of it, is enough to make you do things you never imagined you'd do. My mother called every day, not to support me exactly, to ask about Daniel, to express concern for Brooke, to gently wonder aloud whether I had thought about what Brooke must be going through. When I said I thought Brooke was lying, Mom would go quiet and then say something like, Lee, why would she make something like that up? That question haunted me. I heard it from my Aunt Susan. I heard it from my cousin Trevor's mom when she texted to check in. I even heard it from a coworker who I'd made the mistake of confiding in over lunch. Why would she make it up? As if people don't lie. As if siblings don't sometimes have decades of resentment, carefully folded, under a surface of normal family dinners. My work performance suffered. I missed a deadline on a project I had never missed before. My manager noticed and asked if everything was okay. I said yes, knowing full well I was falling apart. I lost 6 pounds in 2 weeks without trying. And every few days, Brooke would send me a text, warm, careful texts full of I'm so sorry, Lee, and I hope we can talk soon, and I never wanted to hurt you. I read every single one and didn't respond to any of them. Because I was too busy trying to figure out how she'd done it. The turning point came on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after the dinner. I was lying in Priya's guest bed, staring at the ceiling and running through the timeline in my head for the 100th time, when something small snagged in my brain. Brooke had said it happened a few months ago. A few months. In Ohio, October minus a few months puts you somewhere in the summer, June, July, August. I pulled up my mental calendar. Daniel and I had gone to Vermont for 2 weeks in July. A full 14 days, the longest vacation we'd taken together. We'd rented a cabin. I remembered it specifically because Daniel had taken the time off early to help my mother with some paperwork after the estate lawyer had sent a new document to review. Daniel had been in Vermont with me for all of July. Which meant either Brooke had the timeline completely wrong, or she was lying. I texted Daniel that night, do you still have the receipts from Vermont, the cabin rental, anything dated? He replied in under a minute, yes, why? Save everything. The next morning, I called the OBGYN clinic closest to my mother's house. I didn't expect them to tell me anything, HIPAA is real, but I asked whether they could confirm if a patient had been seen recently, without disclosing any specifics. The receptionist, politely, said she couldn't help me. I already knew she'd say that. But I wasn't calling for information. I was calling to establish something for myself. Brooke would need a doctor, a real appointment, a real ultrasound, if this pregnancy was going to remain credible for much longer. If she hadn't made one, that was a problem for her story. I drove to my mother's house on a Saturday when I knew Mom was at her book club. Brooke was home. She opened the door looking surprised, and I walked in without waiting to be invited. I want to see the prenatal paperwork, I said. What? If you're pregnant, you've seen a doctor. I want to see the documentation. She blinked. Lee, I don't have to prove anything to. You're right, you don't have to prove it to me, but you'll have to prove it eventually. Especially if Daniel demands a paternity test, which he will. And when that happens, a doctor's records are going to be the first thing anyone asks for. Something moved across her face, fast and then gone. She crossed her arms. I have an appointment next week. Okay, I said, I'll come with you. No. Then I'll ask Mom to come with you. Another flash of something. Panic maybe, dressed up as irritation. This is insane, she said. You're harassing me, I'm pregnant, Lee, I'm scared. And instead of being my sister right now, you're interrogating me. She started to cry. I recognized the cry. It was the same one she'd used at 16 when she got caught lying about where she'd been, the one that made Mom immediately stop asking questions. It was real looking and completely strategic. Okay, I said, and I walked out. On the drive back to Priya's, I called my old college roommate, Danielle, who was now a nurse practitioner. I explained the situation vaguely, sibling claiming to be pregnant, family drama. I needed to understand something. Those over-the-counter pregnancy tests, I said. Can you buy a positive one, like a fake one, or doctor a real one? Danielle was quiet for a second. It's actually not hard, she said carefully. If you let a real test sit long enough hours, sometimes less, evaporation lines can appear that look like a second line. People have also used Coca-Cola, I kid you not. There are Reddit threads about it. What about a genuinely positive test? You can buy them on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist sometimes, she said. Pregnant women sell them, for pranks or situations like this. It's a real thing. I sat in my car in a parking lot, and let that information settle. Then I did something I'd been hesitating to do for 3 weeks. I called Daniel and told him I believed him. Fully, without reservation. He was quiet for a long moment and then said, Thank you, that's the only thing I needed to hear. I need your help now, I said. It took us 2 more weeks to build what I needed. Daniel pulled every record he had from Vermont. The cabin rental confirmation with check-in and check-out dates, gas station receipts from the highway, photos with timestamps, a restaurant receipt from a place in Burlington that he'd saved because it had been our anniversary dinner. 14 days of paper trail in July. Brooke had claimed the incident happened a few months before October. There was no version of a few months that didn't include July. I also reached out to a woman named Gwen, a mutual friend who had briefly dated a guy in Brooke's social circle. Over coffee, Gwen told me something she'd been sitting on. She'd heard Brooke tell someone at a party in September that she had a plan to deal with Lee's engagement. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, assumed it was just venting. When I explained what had happened, Gwen went pale. I'll tell your mom that, she said. If you need me to, I'll tell her. The final piece came from something almost embarrassingly simple. I went on Facebook Marketplace and searched positive pregnancy test Columbus, Ohio. It took me 4 minutes to find an active listing, a woman who was 8 weeks pregnant selling positive tests for $15 each. She was clearly doing it as a joke resource for people pulling pranks. I didn't buy one. But I screenshotted the listing and noted that this was possible, easy, and entirely accessible to anyone who wanted one. I set the confrontation for the following Sunday, another family dinner. I told Mom I needed everyone there, her, Brooke, Aunt Susan, anyone who had been present the first time. Mom agreed, sounding tired but willing, and I suspected some part of her had been quietly hoping I'd find something that made this less real. Daniel came with me. When we walked in together, Brooke's face tightened. She had clearly not expected that. I waited until everyone was seated. Then I stood up. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I've always preferred to work through things quietly, but I had been rehearsing this in my head every night for 2 weeks, and I was ready. I want to talk about the timeline, I said. Brooke started in immediately. Lee, this isn't the place. You said it happened a few months ago, I continued. A few months before October puts us in summer. June, July, August. Daniel and I were in Vermont for all of July. 14 days. Here are the receipts. I laid the documents on the table in a neat stack. Mom leaned in and looked. Aunt Susan looked. Brooke didn't move. That doesn't prove, Brooke started. You've been pregnant for, 3 months, I said. And you have no prenatal records. I asked you to show me documentation and you refused. You've been to exactly 0 OB appointments, according to what you told me, because the one you claimed was coming next week. I waited. You never mentioned it again. Brooke looked at Mom. She's twisting things. I called 3 OB clinics near this house, I said. None of them could confirm a patient by name, obviously, but I asked a nurse practitioner friend of mine about positive pregnancy tests. I pulled out my phone and showed them the screenshot of the Facebook Marketplace listing. You can buy a positive test for $15. It takes 4 minutes on your phone. The room was utterly still. That's insane, Brooke said, but her voice had shifted. The performance had cracked somewhere along the edge. Then show us prenatal records, Daniel said quietly from beside me. 1 ultrasound, 1 blood test, 1 piece of documentation from a real doctor with a real date, that's all. Brooke looked at our mother, and I watched something happen that I will never forget. My mother, my warm, book club, pot roast-making mother, looked back at Brooke with an expression that was not warmth. It was assessment. A long, slow assessment. The look of someone who has been believing something very hard for weeks and has just felt the first wobble. Brooke, Mom said softly, do you have records? The silence that followed lasted about 6 seconds. which is a very long time when you are standing in a room waiting for your sister to either confirm or destroy her own lie. Brooke began to cry, real crying, this time ragged and ugly and desperate. I didn't know what else to do, she said. I didn't know how to make anyone see Daniel isn't right for her, he's never been right for her, and no one listens to me. Oh my God, Aunt Susan said. And the estate money, and everything is always about Lee. Everything has always been about Lee. Stop, Mom said. Her voice was very quiet and very final. Brooke stopped. Daniel sat down beside me. I felt his hand find mine under the table. I held onto it and I didn't let go. Gwen, who I had asked to be present, and who had been sitting silently in the living room doorway, walked into the kitchen. Carol, she said gently to my mother, I need to tell you something I heard Brooke say in September. The weeks that followed were not a clean healing. I want to be honest about that. My mother cried for 3 days after Brooke confessed. Not in front of us, she called me on the third night and cried on the phone, and what she said was not about Brooke or about Daniel or even about the lie. She said she was sorry that she hadn't immediately believed me, that when a choice had come down to trusting her youngest or trusting her oldest, she had trusted the performance instead of the person. I told her I understood, and I meant it, but I also told her that it had been the loneliest feeling of my life. She heard that, I think she really heard it. Daniel and I did not immediately go back to the way things were. I know that's not the satisfying answer, but it's the true one. I had spent several weeks with a sliver of doubt in my chest, and while I knew the doubt wasn't fair and hadn't been deserved, it had still been there. We agreed to spend a few more weeks separately, to talk to a couples counselor, to be honest with each other about what the experience had shaken loose. By December we were back in our apartment. By February, we had reset the wedding date. My mother has a complicated relationship with Brooke now. Brooke left the house in November and moved into an apartment with a friend from her social circle. They speak, but not with the easy regularity they used to. Brooke has not apologized to me directly in any way that felt real. She sent a text in late October that said, I know I was wrong. 5 words. I didn't respond. My Aunt Susan, to her credit, called me personally and said that she owed me an apology for the speed with which she'd drawn conclusions. She gave it sincerely and without qualifications, and I appreciated it more than I could explain. I think about the estate a lot. Brooke mentioned it in her confession, the estate money, the practicalities of what my father left behind. My father had been clear in his will that the house went to my mother, and that savings were to be divided equally. There was nothing that Brooke could have stolen from me financially by destroying my relationship. It made the whole thing stranger in a way. The motive was never really money. The motive was something older and less tangible than money. It was about being seen. About evening, a score that only she was keeping. I went back to work and caught up on what I'd let slip. I got my appetite back. I started sleeping normally again in November. The thing that stayed with me longest wasn't the lie. It was discovering how easily a family's collective trust could pivot away from someone who had done nothing wrong. I am not naive anymore about the difference between being loved and being believed. Those are two different things, and in a crisis, families choose one. I hope I would choose correctly, if it were ever my turn. In January, 4 months after the dinner, my mother was going through old boxes in the basement and found something she called me immediately about. A journal, Brooke's, from when Brooke was 19, written in the voice of someone processing a lot of anger, about me, about my father, about feeling invisible. Most of it was the ordinary journal content of a teenager working through big emotions. But there were 2 entries that my mother read aloud to me over the phone, with a voice that kept breaking. In one of them, Brooke had written about a boy in her sophomore class who had broken up with her. She'd written, with remarkable clarity for a 19-year-old, about how she had told a girl in her class that the boy had done something he hadn't done, a rumor, something damaging. She wrote that it had felt powerful to make everyone in the room look at him differently. She wrote, I didn't think I'd be able to do it, but I could. It was easier than I expected. And in the second entry, 2 pages later, apparently written a few days after the incident, she had written 3 words across the top of the page in large letters. I'd do it again. She had been practicing this for 10 years. She had just finally aimed it at the right target. I've thought about this story every day since it happened. Not because I'm stuck in it, I'm not, or at least I'm trying not to be, but because it changed the way I think about trust and family, and the stories we tell ourselves about the people we love. So I want to ask you, if you had been in my shoes that first night, sitting at that table, watching your family believe your sibling, would you have stayed? Or would you have walked out with your fiancé? And the harder question, do you think there's any version of this where Brooke and I have a real relationship again? Or is there a point where a lie is so deliberate, so premeditated, that it simply cannot be undone? I don't know the answer to either one, but I'd love to know what you think.